Welcome, Fractal. Welcome to the leadership series. It's my pleasure to introduce Mainak Dhar, my friend, author, and CEO at Kimberly-Clark, to be joining us today. Uh, Mainak and I go back a long time. In fact, Mainak, I, and Mrinali go back a long time, back to the time when we joined PNG together. Those days we were about, I think, 40 management graduates who had joined Procter and Gamble in different functions. We were all cooped up in a place called Amaltas at, I think, Warsaw. And what a day it was! What a time it was! Like a complete party time. That's the kind of Menak I remember till very recently when I connected. Uh, he's transformed into this amazing guy, amazing storyteller, fantastic author. I think he's written over 15 books translated into multiple languages, including Vietnamese, Japanese, and whatnot. What really struck me was when he wrote this something about 5 years ago, Manak, dear me, and he's addressing himself when we joined the corporate world together, and that resonated. And I thought I would love to bring him together with us, make him all our friends, and have Frank Manak join us as a Fractal friend. So welcome, Manak, and thank you for becoming our Fractal friend and talking to us today. So, folks, as introduction to Manak, I've talked already about he's like he says he's, I think, author by night and corporate leader by day. He's just moved during these times to become CEO at Kimberly-Clark. Congratulations, Manak, on that role. Uh, and he's moved from I think General Mills to Kimberly-Clark in similar positions. Uh, I think over time and from the time that I remember Manak, he was we used to be together at this place called Amaltas and have great parties together. I'm reconnecting with him and I see that he's written so many books. He's got a point of view and perspective on several things in life. Things that he's very passionate about are people, and today we are going to talk about careers we build and brands that we build. I mean, ourselves as brands that we build, and that's super exciting and interesting. So we love to be talking to Manak about it, but feel free to be asking him questions and interact with him. I think Srikanth and he'll have a fireside conversation on the topic of building careers and personal brands. But he's an amazing storyteller and a great people leader. So feel free to ask him any questions that we have and get to know him as a friend, is all I would say. So with that, welcome, Manak. And before I hand over to you and to Srikanth to pick up on the topic today, uh, I'd love to ask you at a personal level, given we are talking today about building personal brands and and storytelling. If you were to pick one from from anywhere, it could be Indian mythology, it could be Hollywood, it could be Bollywood, but talk of a personal an archetype that you personally totally resonate with.
For me, if I think of it, the archetype I would probably resonate with a lot is if you think of Bilbo Baggins in Lord of the Rings. Uh, and the reason I resonate with it is my life journey, my growth has really been somebody who's learning to get exposed to, navigate, adapt to, and enjoy a broad world around them. So, growing up, my dad was in the government. We moved all over the place. I was born in Nagaland, lived in Manipur, lived in Sikkim, moved to Delhi for the first time. So, Delhi was the first time I lived in a big city when I was 6 years old, moved to Canada, came back, and, in my corporate world as well, working in diverse roles across multiple places. So, if I think of it, my journey was an introverted kid who would love nothing more than, curling up beside a window and read a book. And from that, getting exposure to diverse cultures, diverse people, adapting to change from an early age, and learning to embrace that, enjoy that, to my journey today where you're expected to lead diverse large groups of people. I think I liken it to Bilbo Baggins. You start content where you are and you're thrust into big adventures, and through that you discover who you really are.
Wonderful. Thank you, Barak. I'd love to take up on Lord of the Rings some point in time with you for sure. But with that, I'll hand over to you and Srikanth. Guys, take it away. I look forward to the fireside conversation that you guys have. And people feel free to engage and ask questions to Srikanth and Menak as we go. And I'll have a few myself too.
Thank you, Ambo. Hello, Mainak. Great to meet you. I know we had this little conversation a few days back. I was, quite, inspired by that conversation and looking forward to a great chat today. My first question to you is, if you could just, the story of your life, if you just share with us in a couple of minutes for people who still don't know you well enough, that would be a great starting point. And then I would like to push into you as an author and sort of have a few questions around that.
Sure. So I'll give you a very quick version of who I am as a person. So if I really go back to who I am, I mentioned a little bit of it now. Growing up, moved around a lot. So from a very early age, learned to appreciate diversity, learned to appreciate how to embrace change. So I still remember when I was 6 years old, moved to Delhi for the first time. Some people welcomed me, and for some people, like, who's the strange kid from the mountains who doesn't know Hindi? And then I went to Canada when I was, I think, 9 years old, lived there for 5 years. Again, some people were really welcoming. And for some, it's like I was the first kid from India they had met. And I realized at a pretty early age that you should never judge people. Sometimes people are just different. You really need to walk a mile in people's shoes before understanding who they are, what makes them tick. So that's, I think, one of the core, some of the core values I really grew up with. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I have largely been guided by what I'm curious about and what I'm passionate about. So I studied economics in college because at that time the Indian economy was opening up, big changes around us. I wanted to learn what was happening around me. When I was doing my MBA, after the first year, I did my internship with Unilever at the time. That's when a light bulb kind of went on in my head that this is what I'm passionate about. It's all about working on things that become a part of people's lives, that are impacting people in a tangible way, creating brands. And that's when I decided to really take the plunge into consumer products and began my career, as Ambo said, with P&G. And worked with P&G for almost 18 years, started in India, then spent 15 years across the APAC region in marketing and general management roles, and then spent about 6 years with General Mills, and now recently joined Kimberly-Clark in India. On the personal front, been married to Pooja for over 15 years, and we have one son, Aditya, who's 12 years old. So that's me in a nutshell.
One of the things I learned about you is that you turned an author at the age of 12. Yeah. And you said something very fascinating in one of the interviews I watched, that you said as the first time you get paid for writing, you were an author, and that's how you became one. So I'd love to hear that story. Love to see you narrate that story to the audience here.
So, growing up, moving around so much, in that day and age, without social media, without internet, without video games, I developed a love for reading at an early age. I had a hyperactive imagination. So I was a bit of a troublemaker as a kid. I had an imaginary friend called Freddie who would sit next to me in class, and I would give attendance for him and write tests for him. I once wrote a whole diary about how the world ended, which involved a meteor strike and an alien invasion. And I supposedly played a big role in saving human civilization. And I dug up the front yard and buried it, hoping to mess with the minds of future historians. So I always used to make up stuff and love telling stories. So I had some stuff written at home. When I was 11 years old or 12, I remember reading this interview by Stephen King saying, when you're writing for yourself, you're a writer. When anybody pays you a cent for what you've written, you become an author. So I took the maths textbook for the next term. I solved all the questions. I kind of reasoned that nobody would want to pay money for my writing. On the reverse side of each page, I kind of photocopied some of my writing, stapled it together, and sold it to my classmates. So I sold 25 copies. We were in Canada at the time at 50 cents a pop. And I walked home to my mom and said, "Ma, I've earned my first royalty. I'm an author." And so that's kind of, so I loved making up stories, and I was always a bit of a troublemaker. So that was kind of the convergence of both of those. My teachers hated me because nobody studied in the next term. They had all the solutions, but that was kind of how that story came about.
On that note, and you've become one of the highly successful authors, and just to give a taste to the people in this audience about how the kind of books you write, I just want to share a trailer of one of your successful books called 0302. So let's just see this for a second. All right. That was quite exhilarating. And my question to you is, how do you come up with these kinds of titles, and what inspires you? Where do you find these stories? What inspires the characters and the plots of the books that you write?
So Srikanth, I think as I think of plots, most of the times for my fiction work, as I said, I've always had a hyperactive imagination. I am constantly asking, what if? So, this story started, what if all the lights went off and no cars worked and no phones worked, and, we're back a couple of 100 years, how would modern society behave? And then you throw in a terrorist attack and so on. So that's a lot of my storytelling really starts by taking everyday reality and kind of just asking wild what ifs to myself and bouncing that around in my head. From a character standpoint, I try to really build off a lot of real people I've met, not necessarily put them in as characters, but really when it comes to motivations, when it comes to character traits. I think part of where I see a convergence between my day and night jobs is it's ultimately all about people. It's understanding motivations, what makes people tick, how people react under pressure, how different personalities and styles can come together to create success. So a lot of my exposure to different people and cultures in my day job actually gives me rich fodder for creating, I think, more fleshed out characters in my books.
And you have written both very successful fiction books and very successful non-fiction books. And do you see the process being very different? Which do you find more interesting and easy, and which one do you have to fight harder to write?
Okay, I think they're both rewarding and both interesting. I think, see, the nonfiction books I write typically are not, serious nonfiction. Most of the nonfiction I write are also, fables or trying to tell a story through getting a message across through storytelling. So to that extent, the writing style isn't really different. I think the big thing is from a nonfiction standpoint, you just need to plan a bit more. When I'm writing a fiction, sometimes all I know is where it started and where I think it will end, and often I'm making stuff up as I go along. That makes it fun, and often you have to rewrite. So a lot of my novels are written in the first person. So it's almost like you're actually that character seeing things and you're building as you go along. Nonfiction, you have to plan a bit more. That's the biggest difference. But from enjoying the writing process, I'd say it's equal, because my nonfiction isn't really pedantic textbooks. It's usually conversational through storytelling that I try and get those messages across.
And I do want to get to how prolific you are and what drives that. But before that, I just wanted to ask you, if somebody wanted to understand Mayank as a writer, which work of yours would you recommend that we read first, of the people who haven't read your works yet?
I guess one,
like all of them as your children, I'm sure they're all equally important to you. But what would you ask us to read first?
I guess, the one book which was actually my first published novel, actually probably, I have no idea if it's even in print anymore. It's available, I think, on the Kindle, which I think really talks to who I was, what I was grappling with, is this book called The Funda of Mixology. So it was all about a young guy in the corporate world who wanted to be a writer. That got put on the back burner, and he's kind of dealing with this conflict. And, in that story, it's told in a fictional way where he has a near-death experience. And he's almost presented alternate futures, one where he's an amazingly successful writer, one where he really rises to the top in the corporate world. And what he learns through it is, success and fulfillment in life is not a binary choice of I do this or that. So the whole tagline, the whole selling point was, life is like a glass of Long Island iced tea. So as Mrunali and Ambo will know, one of the things I enjoyed doing was mixing drinks. And to really enjoy it, you have to mix it up. Life has many components. And when you're trying to seek fulfillment through only one aspect, you're likely to be disappointed. So that was an important book for me, because that was kind of the thought process I was going through at that time. Because I was in the corporate sector, I always wanted to write, but trying to realize how do you find fulfillment in mixing them and finding that balance between them.
Let's get to the topic of your prolific writing, right? I mean, you write a book a year, sometimes two a year, right? And for many others, I know it takes several years to get the creative juices flowing and write anything. So how do you do that, especially when you have such a busy day life? You're a high-flying CEO, very senior executive. So I'm sure there's a lot of demands on your time, plus the stresses and strains of being at the top. How do you manage to get so much productivity out of yourself?
I guess the First thing I'd say, Srikanth, is not just writing a book. Anything you do, I think the ability to be full on about it, I think really needs to stem from what's your motivation? Why are you doing it? And if I were to tell a story about why I do it, it's not because I want to write a book a year. This goes back many years. I lost my mother to breast cancer in 2001. And I remember one of the last conversations I had with her. And, at that time I had started working in the corporate sector, hadn't written for years, was caught up in the usual race of, get doing well at work and so on. So one of my last conversations with her, she said, look, I think you're going to do amazing in whatever you do. You'll achieve great success in your career. But there's one thing I want you to promise me. I said, what? And she said, look, I want you to have that same joy on your face you did when you were a little boy making up stories. And I want you to write. And what she told me is, look, my reading of you as my son is, you were not born to just run in a rat race and achieve a certain designation. You would enjoy really making an impact to people through stories. So promise me you'll write. So I made a promise to her that I would write, and I'd write a book a year. So I think for me, the core of it always starts with, why are you doing what you're doing? For me, it's not that I want to sell a certain number of books or I want to achieve fame. None of that. It's really that promise I made my mom. It's her reconnecting me with who I think I really am. And that's really what drives me. And I think so. One is clarity of purpose. I think the second thing is in how you make it work. I think is then really being clear about what your priorities are. So all of us have the same number of hours a day. So I'm very clear. It's my family first. Second, it's my people at work who are relying on me, because there are a large number of people who are relying on me to be there for them, make the right decisions. And third is I'd like to have some time for myself, for my fitness, for my writing. So how I've over time figured it out, and not something that one day I woke up and had this revelation, but over time I figured it out is, look, how do I slot in my writing and fitness when I'm not needed by my family or people at work? So, how I operationalize that is I wake up pretty early every morning, 5:30. I run for an hour and a half. When I'm working on a book, that's when I'm thinking about what I'm going to write. Then before I wake my son up for school, I write for 20 to 30 minutes every day. It doesn't sound like a lot, but ultimately it's a discipline of doing it every single day. If you do that, you can get a book's first draft written in 6 to 9 months. So for me, it's that discipline. Before COVID, when we were traveling, I would write a lot on flights, on business trips, sitting in hotel lobbies, sitting in lounges. So, probably a pretty boring traveler to have along with you. But that's when, because those were dead times when I'm not with my family, people at work aren't relying on me. And that's when I really focused a lot of time on my writing. So that's kind of how I've managed that.
So in that book, I don't know if you read the Stephen Pressfield book, The War of Art.
Yeah.
It talks a lot about the writing process and how you have to fight resistance to get the creative juices flowing. It appears to me that you are one of those who's gifted, who has creative juices flowing at will. Or do you also go through the same struggles?
No, I think I go through the same struggles, but I think for me, what I've learned is creating that space where you are not distracted by other things. And, honestly, that 1.5 hours when I run, if I'm not writing a book, and honestly, in some days, part of it, I'm thinking about writing, but you need to create a space where you're actually able to reflect. You're actually able to tune out from all the day-to-day things that happen at work and outside. And that's when I think you can get your creativity going. That's when you can introspect about even stuff happening at work. You can introspect about tough decisions you're mulling over. So I find it really important to create that space. Otherwise, in our, once the clock starts ticking on the day job, we all have the same pressures. There's meetings, there's calendar, there are people counting on you. I want to have time for my family at the end of it. So I've realized that 1.5 hours is precious for me, because that's when I'm it's to some extent cathartic, because you're really giving rein to your imagination, thinking of stuff. To some extent, it's when you're creating that space to reflect and introspect. So I think that's important. I go through periods when, I'm working on a book and I'm completely out of ideas. But having that space forces me to say, look, I'm doing nothing else. I'm going to think about this, bounce around ideas in my head before I can solve something.
I want to move focus to your career, which is also, not just the writing career, but as an executive, and you've achieved some tremendous success over the last many years. You graduated out of IMA, and and you joined P&G, which is, everybody who joins P&G is extremely smart. We already know that. So and so you are one of the many who joined there, and then to rise to the top in these short years. What, if you could just tell us, what are those principles that you followed which made you really successful? Some things that people in this audience can learn from, because there's a lot of early career professionals in this audience today. Would love to learn from your what you got right and maybe what you got wrong as well in the first years of your career.
Yeah, so I guess the first thing I'd say is, I don't consider myself any more successful or less successful. I don't think that's the point of building careers. I think everybody who joined with me is doing great things in their own way. I think the most important thing I've learned in my journey is, look, it's not a race to get ahead of anybody. It's the race to be the best you possible. And one of the things I learned, maybe not very early in my career, maybe that's one of the things I could have learned earlier, is do what you are energized by, what you're passionate about, and what you enjoy. So, my career and whatever shape it's taken has not been the result of a grand master plan where I said I need to be a director at this age, I need to be a CEO at this age. I still don't think like that. Whenever I've had choice points in my career, I've really asked myself, look, what will I have fun doing? What naturally plays to what I'm good at? Where will I make an impact to people? And that's kind of how I've steered my career. So to be honest, my big learning is when you do things you enjoy, that play to your strengths, that make you feel fulfilled, you're likely to be happier and more successful. The second thing I've learned, which again, maybe I should have learned a bit earlier, is what makes for real fulfillment is when you're in an environment and with people who share the same values, the same culture that's important to you. So that's, I think, the other thing which I've really learned, that, it's not just chasing a designation or a salary or success. It's do stuff that you're going to have fun doing, that's going to make you feel fulfilled, that's going to be impactful, and find environments and people who share the same values and a culture where you're going to be able to thrive. So those are two things. The third thing that's always been important to me is, never lose your sense of individuality. I think, to be absolutely honest, when I joined the corporate world, one of the conversations I had with one of my bosses, I think 2 years in, and Ambo and Ronaldi will know the name. This was Nayantara, and we were just having lunch, and she said, "What are you doing in the corporate world? Because you want to write, you want to do other things." And I said, look, ultimately the thing which was always in my mind is I don't want to become a quote unquote corporate drone. And one of my learnings has been, you're going to be more successful when you're authentic. Every one of us is different. Every one of us has skills outside of work. Every one of us has interests. And the more we bring that whole us to work, the more fulfilled we'll be, the more successful we'll be. So those are some of the things I've learned. And, I'd say to your point, what do I wish I had learned earlier is I wish I'd figured some of this out earlier. So to be honest, when I started working, it's not that my dad was in the government. We had no networks, no mentors, nothing. I learned everything by doing. And so that's one of my natural passions today is, look, if in a small way I can help young people figure out things that are right for them, figure out some of the things I could have figured out earlier in my career.
And in one of the things that you have interviews that I listened to, you also mentioned the importance of humility, and the way you described it was very interesting, which is something you just said as well, which is try to be the best version of yourself rather than fight with others, which I thought was very, very fascinating, because Fractal has a similar thing of saying, we look for people who are humble, hungry, and smart, and so the humility is one of those interesting things. I think we spend a lot of time. Success actually works to our disadvantage, right? Because we tend to become arrogant and we feel like we've got, we deserve it and we are really good and we're better than others. But how have you managed to keep your humility in check? I mean, our ego in check and humility going. Is that something that you work at it? You feel like every few years you feel like, my ego is grown again, I need to cut it to size, or is it just a natural thing that you're born with?
No, I guess there's a combination. I think one is, as you said, there are to some extent it's what you grow up with, the values you learn, the things that are important to you. And honestly, these are not things you learn in business school or at the workplace. It's the family environment you grew up in. So I as I said, I grew up in a very middle class family, and the big thing was, look, you can always get better. You always have to learn. There's you could never be at a stage where you say I know it all. So part of it was those values I grew up with. I think the other thing that's really important is to be around people who will help keep you grounded. I think that's really important. I mean, all of us are human, and all of us run the risk of starting to believe in our own myths. So when anybody introduces me as CEO this, CEO that, author this, I always cringe a bit, saying, "Hey, I'm just another guy, right? I'm just another guy who's trying to figure things out, who's trying to be a good dad, who's trying to be a good husband, who's trying to do the best he can at work." Half the time I don't even have figured out all that I need to get done. So I'm in no way special. So one of those things is having that self-awareness, and secondly is having people. So for me, I have a couple of really good mentors who know me really well for dozens of years. Whenever I'm in doubt, whenever something's bugging me, I'll ask them. Whenever I am going off the rails, they'll tell me straight. So I think you need those. I use my wife as a great sounding board, to bounce off ideas. She's somebody I really trust in terms of keeping me grounded, in terms of who I am outside of my business card and what I do. So I think you need a combination. It's the values you grow up with, it's that self-awareness, and then it's having some people around you who are going to help keep you grounded through times good and bad.
You said you like to be a great husband and a good spouse. That's one thing I think I need a lot of lessons on. So what are some of the ways in which you can be a good spouse to your spouse?
If I figure it out, if anybody else has figured it out, please tell me. I'd love to know as well. I think on that count, all of us are firmly work in process. So I can't say that I have it figured out any more than others, but I'd say some of the things I've learned along the way is it's like any other relationship. I think it starts with empathy. It starts with understanding that sometimes you get used to that, they have different interests, they have different things that make them ticks, and it's really appreciating that. The second thing which I believe is it's doing the small things. Like in any relationship, it's not the big grand proclamations of friendship or love. It's the small things you do for each other every day that count. But as I said, I'm still figuring it out, man. If you figure it out before me, let me know.
No, I don't think I'm figuring it out as we speak. But yeah, I definitely want to get better at that. Let's put it that way. The other thing you have also mentioned in many of your talks is about self-awareness, right? Understanding who you really are, and that will help you find the right spot. I mean, you talked about what is pleasurable and meaningful. One of the things that I keep talking about is, especially this is Peter Drucker's wisdom to some extent, is find things that give you pleasure, meaning, and where you're in the zone, where you feel like you're not too easy, not too difficult, just in that zone of flow. So, I mean, how did you figure out who you truly are? How did you go on this journey of self-awareness? And if someone else in this audience wants to become more self-aware, what should they do?
I guess the honest answer to that, Srikanth, is, I think self-awareness is something you develop by doing and by having experiences where you figure out what you truly enjoy and what you don't. I think all of us have experiences. The one thing which I'll say is taking the time to reflect, into just stepping back from the here and now and saying, look, am I having fun? And then if you're having fun, understanding why you're having fun. If you're not having fun, understanding why you're not having fun. So that's one of the things which I learned to do. Not very early in life, man. I started maybe thinking about this probably in my mid to late 20s. And a lot of it started when I was presented with some choices, life and career choices. And as I started thinking about them, I said, look, should I think about them more holistically? So to give a real example, soon after I was married and we were in Singapore at the time, an opportunity came for me to move to the US as part of a global role on a big brand that Procter had. And I was starting to think about it in all the conventional terms of, what does it mean for career, etc. And this is where I think having good mentors help. So one of my mentors whom I trusted, who's still a mentor of mine, I asked him for advice, and he said, look, forget the role and career. Fundamentally ask yourself, where will you have more fun? Role A, role B, and it's not just the work you do, it's what it means for your family, what it means for what you're doing day to day. So that was the first time I actually started thinking of it. And at that time I said, look, doing a global strategy job where you're basically having high impact work, but largely in isolation, versus doing a much more hands-on job. And I said, look, what do I enjoy about what I'm doing now? It's the fun of walking into work every day and saying what impact has happened to business. It's seeing that share every month. It's working around a team of people who are doing something together. I said, look, that's what I enjoy. It's less the size of the P&L. So that was the first time I started asking myself that question, and that led me to some clear choices. And since then, I've kind of gotten into the habit of whenever I'm going through a new experience, doing a new role, at a fork in the road, I ask myself that question. And over time, I think I've developed an understanding of the things I enjoy doing, the things I enjoy less, and that started framing some of the choices I make.
Got it. Got it. Um, uh, so you talked about mentors, and you spoke about how you maybe didn't have the right mentors to begin with, and how you have over the years found better mentors. I have personally also felt that I didn't have a mentor when I needed them the most, but I've realized that everybody needs a good mentor.
Yeah.
And so my question is, how did you find a mentor? What does it take to find a good mentor? And is it about the mentor finding you, or you finding a mentor? How does it work?
See, it works both ways. I'll tell you what I didn't do early enough, and which is, again, if I were to advise myself all those years ago, one of the things I didn't do enough of early on in life was ask for help. Early on, early 20s, I think, for probably all the wrong reasons. There was a lot. I put out probably more pressure on myself than I needed to. That I need to figure everything out. Whether it's career issues, whether it's balancing career and stuff happening with family, I put on a lot of pressure on myself. And that led to, I'd say, some unhealthy outcomes. I talked about my mother. So when my mom was really unwell, I was trying to deal with all that pressure all within myself, that I need to do well at work. I'd newly gotten promoted to brand manager, but my mom was really unwell. And I took all that pressure on myself, which was starting to tell on my health. And that's when one of these senior leaders who became a really trusted mentor reached out to me. And one day I remember we were just over drinks, and he said, look, what's going on in your life? And I told him about all the stuff happening at work. And he said, look, you just look stressed. What's happening? And that was the first time I actually started sharing some of what was going on beyond work. And then he said, look, sometimes people may not have the answers. Sometimes there are no right answers. But sometimes just sharing what's on your mind and where you need help can unlock possibilities. And that was kind of when the light bulb went on in my head, that sometimes it's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to open up to people and say, look, I don't have this figured out. I could use some help. And I think what I've discovered is when you do that, you attract people who are going to be willing to help you out. So that was probably something I didn't used to do. And when I started doing that, I started developing relationships with people who helped me with advice, and many of them have been then ended up being lasting mentors over many years.
I know we usually not like talking about failures, but every successful individual also has failed many times, right? That's the path to success, is through failures. Which of the failures in your life if you feel has shaped you the most?
I'd say the biggest failure I had was, it wasn't a unidimensional failure of something happened at work or something happened at home, but I think it was a composite of this was back in 2012. As a family, we had just moved for the first time. My son was born in Singapore. He was 18, not even 18 months old. We had moved to Bangkok. I had moved to a new role. After doing regional roles for many years, I had moved to an in-market role, heading up marketing for Southeast Asia. Young baby, moving for the first time as a family, new boss who didn't know me, I didn't know him, business had its own pressures. I think the biggest failure I made at that time in the first few months was I jumped into fixing one aspect of those problems, and I jumped into fixing work because it was the same company. I was keen to jump in and make a good impression. There were pressures on the business, and I completely underestimated what that meant for family. And it was terrible. Those first 6 months were horrible, and it was horrible because I realized at the end of it that my wife was miserable. She had just moved to a completely foreign land with a young baby, no support system. And I was managing multiple markets across Southeast Asia. I was traveling a lot, dealing with a new boss, dealing with business challenges. And I really had to reorient because I said, look, this is going to lead to disaster. I'm not happy. She's not happy. I'm not doing as well as I can at work. So I completely reeled that back a bit, got to a better balance. And that was my biggest learning. It's easy to talk about work-life balance. That was the first time I actually had to balance work, family, managing all the stakeholders you have. And I learned a lot of lessons. So when I moved to Mumbai from Singapore, when I moved to General Mills, I really took that lesson to heart, and I said, look, I'm just going to take 1 month completely off between jobs. Make sure my son's settled at school, make sure we're settled in a new home, ease into the transition, instead of assuming you could fix one thing while the other things in your life fix themselves. So that was the one time when I really learned a pretty hard lesson in practical terms on, what does balance mean and how do you sometimes need to get that balance in your life.
I know you're writing a book, soon to be published book on personal branding. I think many of the audience here might be interested in understanding what exactly is the concept of building a personal brand, how does one go about building a personal brand. So if you could give us a sneak preview of your book,
sure.
Then I think that'll be great.
No, so Srikanth, this book is going to be out in the next month or so. But I think the story behind this book was, early in the COVID crisis, when the lockdowns had first been put in place in India and elsewhere. I used to keep hearing about people losing jobs, young kids out of campus, getting their offers rescinded. And I said, look, let me see if I can help out. So I just put an open offer out on LinkedIn that, look, if anybody needs help with mentoring, help with career, advice on resumes, interviews, anything, just let me know. I'll see if I can help. So within a couple of weeks, close to 30 young kids reached out. And what was common is all of them early in their career. They didn't have established networks or mentors, and they reached out for help. And as I started chatting with each of them, I started noticing a few common threads, which to me go into the core of what I think personal branding is. The first is, just as all strong brands have a clear sense of purpose. So the big question which I'd ask a lot of them is, why do you want to do what you want to do? So people would say, I want to work in FMCG. Why? Does that, to your point, does that really play to your passions, your strengths? So a lot of time I'd spent talking to these kids was about driving clarity on the why, which is, do you really understand what you enjoy, what you're good at, instead of just chasing something because it's someone else's definition of success. So one was really starting with defining that purpose. The second area where I think there are a lot of analogies with brand management is, what actually differentiates you. All of us grew up in that environment in India, which is, you study hard, you get a good degree. So then I'd have really bright kids saying, I really want to succeed, and I think I'm set up for success because I have an MBA from the school. And I think the whole conversation there was, look, in branding terms, that's a point of parity. Anyone applying to the job has an MBA. And you need to think really about what differentiates you. And sometimes that's not the degree you have. Sometimes it's the experiences you have. Sometimes it's the other strengths and skills you have that round you off as an individual. Sometimes it's the unique fit you have to what you're trying to do. Really getting people to think beyond a unidimensional view of, I have a degree and I've worked in company X, therefore I'm set up for success. And the final piece was really thinking more strategically about, what in branding terms people would call the moments of truth. How do you think about the first moment of truth, which is your resume in this case, or your LinkedIn profile, or the first time you meet someone in an interview, and so on. So as I was thinking through all of that, having multiple conversations, very similar conversations, I said, look, it might be useful to put it all together in a book. And I knew I was joining my new workplace on September 1. So I said, look, let me take a sprint. It's a lockdown. Let me get this book written before I join my new company. So I wrote like mad for 3 months. And I said, look, the earlier this is out, the more it can help people. Found a publisher. And it's going to be out in the next month or so. It's called Brand New Start. And I'll send you details when it's out. But this is something which, that's what sparked the whole thought process of the book about personal branding.
I do want to save some time for questions from the audience, but I have a couple of questions now. With you wearing the hat of a senior executive of a Fortune 100 company, especially in the world of AI, and I know all of us here are in the AI industry, and I just want to hear from your vantage point as a senior executive of a Fortune 100 company. Is AI a big deal? Is it going to change the way your business works, the world works, and where is AI in the scheme of things in terms of importance and urgency for a company like the ones you work for, P&G, General Mills, or Kimberly-Clark?
No, I think if you ask me, AI and data are going to be at the core of the future of our businesses. And it's less about what we feel. I think it's all about where our consumers are headed. Just earlier this afternoon, I was in a meeting with my leadership team talking about where is our business headed, where is the industry headed. And if you look at the convergence of 3 things, traditionally marketers would talk about look, you're all need to be consumer centric. So you're thinking about where the consumer shops, where the consumer lives, where the consumer is receptive. What's happening with the world around us is where the consumer shops is transforming very rapidly across many of our categories. Where the consumer is receptive is transforming. It's no longer, discrete pieces of brand information given out through advertising. It's always on messaging, on social, on digital. It's, e-commerce is in itself a source of awareness as well as purchase. And from a standpoint of where the consumer lives, yes, you need old-fashioned distribution, but even that's getting incredibly data-enabled. So if you think of it, all companies, including ours, now have Salesforce automation. We're using that to drive efficiencies in how we cover stores. But when you put it all together, I think the common thread is we are living in a world already, it's not the future, where truly winning with our consumers is going to require us making sense of, seeing patterns in, and driving actions from a lot of data. We'll have data from online, we'll have data from e-commerce, we'll have data from our offline sales channels, but really connecting the dots and the ability to use that to derive insights, the ability to take action. And in that data-rich world, the downside is you can't have a guy on an Excel sheet managing it. I remember when I was an ABM back in the day, 25 years ago, your media plan used to be done on an Excel sheet. Those were simpler times. When we think about the different sources of data, the real-time nature of some of that data, that's where I think using AI, really getting strategic about data analytics is a key skill for anyone in a consumer-facing business today. So it is an imperative. To be honest, a lot of us, I feel, are still learning, are still growing. And that's where I think having partners who can paint a picture of what the future might look like for us, lead our thinking, becomes incredibly important. And which is where I think some of the work Fractal's doing is really great, because I think a lot of companies know what they need to do, don't necessarily know how to do it. And that's where that capability becomes really important.
What do you think are the key roadblocks, right? I mean, the promise to performance gap for AI is huge. There's tremendous amount of hype around AI, and there's also tremendous amount of fear associated with that hype. What will happen if AI takes over the world and so on, right? So there's killer robots and everything else, right? And maybe title for a subject for your next book. Maybe. At the same time, we know that companies, big companies, we are not talking of the ordinary companies, the truly world-class great companies like the ones you have played a role in, are still scratching the surface in many ways. So what is that big gap between promise to performance in companies, in real world companies like the ones you work for, not maybe Google, maybe they'll figure it out, but what is that gap and how does one plug those gaps?
I think the biggest gap in any transformation is the inherent organizational inertia and the safety and comfort of the status quo. I think that's human nature. When you've been doing something for many, many years and it's worked for you, often people don't change till it's actually too late and things are broken. I think that's what I've spotted. To be honest, I can't say I have the magic answer on how to fix it, but one of the big things I am passionate about is how do you actively encourage and create change agents within the organization. So if I think of my previous organization, AI is a far cry. We were making a transition from good old-fashioned pen and paper order taking to full SFA, real-time analytics, dashboards. And the biggest fear was less the tool, it was more the culture of, oh, now everybody knows everything every day. All that cushion is gone. The full data transparency was intimidating to many people because you're not waiting for the month end to say why things are the way they are. Everyone sees the data every day. So one of the things we did at that time is we got a really young kid, I think he was 24 years old, who had done a lot of work in analytics and data. And we said, you run this, you report directly to the MD. And you're empowered to drive change. You have the backing to drive change. So I think one of the things a lot of big companies need to do is have the courage to bring in change agents, encourage them, drive diversity of thinking, and then take the organization along. Because I think the big resistance is not the intellectual part. I think everybody, when you ask them at an intellectual level, will say, yup, this is likely to help our business. It's all the other fears that come in of what does this mean for how work gets done? Will my role be relevant anymore? How will more transparency help or hinder how I'm assessed? It's all those other fears that I think leaders need to A, acknowledge, B, tackle, but then C, really bring in change agents and support them in breaking through some of these barriers.
Thank you, Mainak. We'll open it up for some questions. We have about 11 minutes. I know there are tons of questions. Pooja, if you have the questions, fire away.
Yes. So yes, we have time for maybe 2 or 3 questions. First question to you, Menak, is can you please share your transformational stories from your roles at PNG and GMI and how you plan to leverage these learnings at KC?
Well, I guess, it's a good question. I guess there are
Mainak,
a lot of...
I should clarify that we serve all 3 of these companies. So yeah, we love all these companies that we serve. Yes.
Yeah. No, I think there's a lot of different stories, but if I talk about the broad themes I learned, I think in PNG across multiple roles, one of the things I really learned is how do you take advantage of global scale and capability, but then really bring it to life in a way that can unlock transformation locally. So in a lot of my career, I worked on global brands and hair care, but some of the transformation really came when you're taking advantage of global chassis, best practices, technologies, but then really building deep local insight on what needs to be customized, what needs to be tweaked. So that led to unlocking transformational growth in some of our emerging markets like India and Indonesia. So that was one of the big learnings, it's that balance. I think at General Mills, the biggest thing I learned was how do you really look at organizational transformation as an underpinning of business transformation? So, we were looking to transform from an organization that had largely sold, flour as a portfolio for many, many years, transforming into a faster growing portfolio into baking mixes and snacks. And my biggest learning was it's less the intellectual part of which category should we play in and what capabilities do we need, because that's easier to get by, but it's then really understanding what needs to change in the organization from a mindset standpoint, ways of working standpoint, talent and capability standpoint. So that was the biggest learnings. And I think as I look at what I'm doing now and what I'll do moving forward, I'll definitely tap into both those learnings, continuing to work in a global organization where we're looking at transformation. I think those are both learnings I'll tap into.
Thank you, Menak. The next question for you is, what according to you is the biggest challenge that CPG will face in 2021?
I think that's a very interesting question. I think the biggest challenge a lot of people are going to face in the CPG industry and otherwise is, I think, 2020 obviously been a roller coaster for all of us. And I think the biggest challenge will be not assuming things will go back to the way they were. I think, in the early days of the pandemic, I'd catch myself saying it, I'd hear people say it, when things are back to normal. I think the biggest challenge will be acknowledging they may not be back to normal the way we define, but some things are changing and what are we learning from there? So, in some of the industries and businesses I'm looking at, we're seeing a clear shift in how consumers shop, significant shift to e-commerce. And it's really accelerated what was already a growth curve. And I think rather than saying, well, things were different, but embracing that reality and dealing with it. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is not sitting and waiting for things to resolve, but embracing the change and saying, look, there are some parts of the change that are negative, but that is what it is. There are some trends that are emerging that we need to embrace and drive. I think that's going to be the biggest challenge for business leaders and certainly in CPG.
Thank you for that. Next question to you is, hi Menak, what is your suggestion to budding entrepreneurs on how to build a high-performing team at work? What you as a CEO must do and not do? Also, how do you deal with performance pressure and expectation of people around you?
Okay, no, they're all, I think, very good questions and big questions in their own right. In terms of building teams, I'm a big believer that build a team that truly complements you as a leader. All of us are humans, all of us have strengths and opportunities. So if I look at myself, one of the things I can get much better at is process orientation. That's not something I naturally gravitate to. So whenever I've been in a team which has done really well, I make sure I'm surrounding myself with people who can complement me on that, who can tell me when things need to be closed, who can tell me where we can run things tighter. So I think for any leader, whether he or she is an entrepreneur or not, is really to say, look, what do I bring to the table and what are areas where I need help? and then finding a good mix of people who can amplify your strengths, but equally people who can help you with things that you may not naturally be that good at. So that's one thing. I think what was there was one about how do you deal with pressures, right?
Yes, performance pressure
Performance pressure.
of people around you.
I guess the big thing on performance pressure is, my learning has been deal with it before it becomes pressure, which is, have clear expectations, have constant conversations with your managers and your stakeholders. So, in my career, I've learned that you put yourself in a corner when you are not sharing information early enough, when things have changed, but you're not bringing it to the table early enough. So one of the things I try and do with my managers and stakeholders is have very constant conversation when things are changing. Let them know, even if I don't have all the answers, so that they're not surprised. So I think one of the best ways of managing expectations is minimize surprises. Take people along on the journey instead of wanting to show up buttoned down with all the answers. And the nature of running businesses is there'll be ups, there'll be downs. Sometimes there'll be external issues. So take an example from a few years ago when demonetization hit. It obviously set us back in the short term. But the first thing I did is I called my boss and said, hey, this is what's happening. I don't know how this is going to pan out, but likely there's going to be a big impact on our distribution chain. And I'll let you know every couple of days, every week, as we learn more, I'll let you know what's happening externally. Versus saying, look, something's happened, I'll try and figure it out, have a message track, go back with an answer. So for me, it's a combination of taking people along, minimizing surprises, letting them know when you're facing challenges. That doesn't mean the pressure will go away, but then you're making people part of the solution rather than just showing up to them saying I have delivered or not.
Thank you so much for that, Mena. We have time for maybe one more question, so I'll ask you this next question. And the question is about your writing. And this person asks, has reader feedback been a factor in your journey as a writer? Do you elicit that feedback actively? And has there been any significant change in your writing or thinking style as a result of such feedback?
No, I mean, reader feedback is the thing I enjoy the most about writing. I mean, when I hear from anybody, whether it's an email or somebody posts something on social media, that's what actually I've realized I enjoy the most about it is you're connecting with people through ideas. And for me, books are actually the ultimate kind of social media because you're actually forming deep connections with people through ideas, sometimes across boundaries of language, culture, geography. And it has in many ways influenced my writing. To give you an example, I wrote this novel called Alice in Deadland many years ago, and that did very well. And I remember getting a lot of emails from readers who loved it saying, we'd like to know more what happens next. Please write a sequel. I had never thought of writing a sequel. And I actually then started writing it. And back then I had a Facebook page for this book where some of my readers were there, and I said, hey, I'm thinking of taking this book in this direction. What do you think? And many of them gave suggestions. So that was a fascinating journey for me where almost it became a process of co-creation, where readers were inspiring me to write more. They were shaping my idea. And I had a lot of fun because I actually wrote in many of those readers as characters in that series. So from what started as one book, it ended up being an 8-book series. And it was really because I had readers who were saying, we'd like to learn more. And I'd ask them, what do you want to learn more about? And that's what I wrote. So it was, in a way, the equivalent of market research, but it wasn't research because they were part of that journey. We were having conversations. And that was probably the most fun writing experience I had because it felt like I was creating something with people rather than me writing for people.
Mainak, I think we are sort of running out of time. Just one last question for me, a short, quick answer. You have a 12-year-old son. What is he learning, and how does he become a very productive, successful individual? Given that 20 years from now, when he's very much in his mid-career, AI would have been playing a very big role, and work, as we know, would have changed.
Yeah.
What are you focusing? How are you building him as a great professional? What is he learning?
No, I guess the big things for me at a foundational level are to ensure he's growing up with the right values. We talked about the values of humility, the values of being open-minded. The other thing is the space to figure out what he wants to do. So no pressure on being anything, but really saying, look, what are you passionate about? What do you enjoy doing? And where we spot pockets of interest or enjoyment, saying, hey, how can you learn more? So, he loves writing. Not surprising because he probably sees me at it. So I said, fine, play with it. You don't have to be an author. Play around with it, see where it goes. So he's actually written a novel, which is fascinating. But, if that's something you enjoy, given where the world is growing with technology, he had an interest in it. So he started learning coding. And it's not because, I want him or him to be an engineer or not, but it's saying at an early age, really take the luxury of figuring out what interests you. And then as parents, I think our job is to say, hey, feed that interest with no pressure on you need to become something, but really try out things you enjoy and see where that passion takes you. So that's kind of where we're trying to help him, I think, discover who he becomes, what he becomes, by giving him opportunity to have some of these experiences.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you, Mainak. It's been fascinating listening to your insights. And I hope the audience here really enjoyed this conversation as much as I enjoyed it. And thank you, Ambo, for introducing Mainak to Fractal, and looking forward to interacting more with you over course of time, hopefully. And hopefully organizing a visit for you to our offices sometime soon, whenever the pandemic is over and work some semblance of normalcy, not the same as before, as you rightly already pointed out. But I'm hoping that part of whatever is a new normal, there still will be some offices, and I hope we can have you visit us sometime soon.
Wonderful. Thanks for having me over. It's a pleasure being here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mainak. Thanks, Ambo.
Thanks,
Thanks, Pooja.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.